And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Jameela George, our good friend from New Delhi, India. We first met in 2009 when she was at the Center for Bioethics as one of our first Global Bioethics Education Initiative scholars. And I had the opportunity to travel to India in 2011 and participate in a workshop on bioethics for a group of Christian doctors, nurses, and chaplains who serve as missionaries in the most underserved parts of India. Dr. George comes with a long string of credentials in active care, in public health, in research and teaching. Let me highlight just a few of those. She earned her master's in international research bioethics at Monash University, Australia, and is a physician working in family health. She worked with the Emmanuel Hospital Association as the director of SHARE and the Balwan Community Health and Development Projects. She has been faculty of the India Council for Medical Research, and this is a national body, and teaching bioethics workshops. She has done several studies, and let me just highlight some of the issues on which she has performed both multi-centric and single-center studies. The healthcare needs and healthcare providers in North India. Self-risk perceptions among adolescents regarding sexual experiences and experiments. The terminally ill elderly. Revitalization of health for all. Disabilities among the elderly. Intermediate shelters after the tsunami. Those are just a few. She gave a plenary address on black market organ transplantation in India at our national conference in 2009. And currently, her latest entrepreneurial project, she is the executive director of the Center for Bioethics in India, which has finally completed the rather long and winding process to final government approval. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jameela George.
It's my privilege to be here this morning and to address you. And I want to thank Ms. Paige Cunningham, the director of the Center for Bioethics and Human Dignity at Chicago, for giving me this opportunity to be here. What I intend to do is to highlight some of the issues that the women and girls across the globe face. And for that purpose, I primarily focus on the situations in India, because India is a very complex country, and it sort of represents a vast majority of the problems that you find across the globe. And I would also draw your attention to some of the other issues, which is not directly found in India. So we've been hearing about the dignity of women, and I would just like to say what indignity is. Now, when we say indignity, it has many shades of humiliation, abusive treatment, a way in which one's sense of pride or dignity is offended. And there is injustice, insult, dishonor, disrespect, discourtesy, various shades of it. So this we are speaking in terms of the whole woman and relating to health. Now, health, as you know, WHO has stated very clearly, as a state of physical, mental, social well-being, and not the absence of disease or infirmity. It's a total being. It's not compartmentalized into this and that and the other. And it's a well-being, much more complete, peaceful existence that we ought to be living. So as I go through these slides, I'll draw your attention to certain things which prevent women and girls across the globe not to be experiencing good health in many ways because of the discrimination that they face from conception to death. Now I want to just for a moment speak about the historical views that we have. In ancient Greece, it was an embarrassment and a disgrace and shame to give birth to a girl. And in China, there was a practice in which the daughters were not named. They were called daughter 1, daughter 2, daughter 3. And on the third day after birth, the daughter was put under the cot to signify that the girl would undergo humiliation. And that's how they start. That's how a girl starts her life. Now, in Rome, a historian called women a babe, a minor, a ward, incapable of doing or acting anything according to her own individual taste, under the guardianship of the husband. So we see these various ways in which they've been colored, I would say. The common English law also had its prejudices. Any property that was brought by the wife into a marriage was directly at the disposal of the husband. She had no real authority over it. And any income that came out of that property, the man had the freedom to use it as he pleased. And it is only in the late 19th century that married women achieved the right to own property, to enter contracts in par with others. So I was really surprised to see this, that even in the English law it was like this. Now going back to India, in the Vedic period, that is about 1700 or 1100 BC, the women of higher upper caste were educated and they married at a later age. They were mature. There were even priests in the temple that women had the privilege to be. At the same time, they had a system called Devadasi, which means God's servant, in which girls of low caste were married to a temple as a prostitute. So these girls were really sexually exploited. As days went by, I'm not sure when exactly, subjection was the cardinal principle. So the woman was to be subject to the father when she was a girl, then to the husband, and then if the husband died, to her son. So at no point was she allowed to be herself. She had always to be under subjection. Now, when I talk about women like this, it doesn't mean that all of us in India are in this position. There is a wide spectrum of people, and some of them are doing very well. But now today our focus is on women and their struggles, so I would do so. Because you are aware that we had the Indian Prime Minister, a woman, a President, a woman, and we have in the Parliament 33% set aside for women, which is a great achievement. It has been a struggle, but still we are there. Now, long ago, there were some practices in India. You would have heard about sati, in which the widow, a new widow, would be burnt alive along with the husband when he was cremated. Otherwise, the woman was buried alive along with the husband. There was also another third method in which when there was battle and when one side would lose, all the women of that particular community would set themselves on fire to escape all the harassment by the opposing force. So they just killed themselves. Well, this is the history. But we all know that now also we have various problems by which girls and women are discriminated, and they have their own consequences. So worldwide, we have 42 million abortions, out of which about 11 million are in India. Now, regarding the abortions, 2/3 of them are done, in the back alleys by unprofessional people in unhygienic conditions, by many methods, native methods, so that infection and maternal mortality is a problem. It's estimated that about 20,000 women die because of this each year. Now, before we look into all the problems of these girls, we know that there is a male preference in our country, and in a way it is across the globe. You know, the intensity may vary, but there is a tinge of it all over the place. Now, when we think of the violence in the life cycle of women, it is shocking actually. The problem starts before birth. It continues through infancy, girlhood, adolescence, adulthood, and elderly into widowhood. Now, we'll see one by one all these. I'll highlight only the important ones because I'm sure you've heard about the rest. Now, as you see this is a female feticide which took place in one of our hospitals. These abortions are conducted in such a way as though it is a contraception. Repeated abortions when the fetuses are female. And then, of course, we know that when it is a female feticide, you prevent the birth of a child. Now, this particular baby, the mother was brought to one of our hospitals with labor pains. When the doctor examined the patient, he found that the baby was dead. So when a pelvic examination was done, the doctor felt something rubbery inside and had no clue because never in his life has he felt like that. Anyway, the lady was in a very bad shape. She could not deliver in the natural method. So she was taken for a Caesar, and when they opened, it was putrefaction. This child was killed by the rubber tube that you see there, the orange tube. Somebody had inserted it into the vagina, into the uterus, and strangulated the child. And then it was inside there for a few days, and it became like this. So, to what extent can people go in killing the children? Now, there are various other ways also in which children are killed. After birth, if they do not want this girl, there are various ways. One is, you have the anterior frontal, the soft part here. They prick it with needles so that it gets meningitis and dies. Otherwise, the child is not cared for, she gets pneumonia and dies. And another thing is, if they just don't want the child, they may not tie the umbilical cord, so it bleeds to death. Or they just immerse this child, drown the child in a bowl of milk and dies. So these are, totally unacceptable measures done to a small child for no fault of hers. Anyway, so all these things are, due to these things, the child sex ratio in our country is very bad. As you see, it keeps on decreasing because there are more and more of this female feticide and infanticide happening. The same thing is found in China also because of the one-child policy and various problems there. You have surplus males. Now let's see some of the special statistics on girl child in India. About 12 million girls are born, and 1 out of 6 girls do not live to see the 15th birthday. Well, that's a bit too long, but then 1 million of them are unable to survive even their first birthday. And 1/3 of these deaths take place at birth. And every 6th girl child's death is due to gender discrimination. 300,000 girls, more girls than boys, die each year in India. And it was interesting to see that one all is not gloom. There are many measures taken to improve the situation and to bring hope into the situation. And in the central part of India, in 2 years back, one organization, collected the girls, all the girls who had the name Na Kushi, that means not happy. Can you imagine being named not happy? So there were 265 girls who were called not happy. That means we are not happy with you, we don't want you. And they gave new names to these girls, a new dignity to them. So such is the situation in some of the places. Now, due to all these things, you see that there are missing women. You would have heard, of course, about this. About 44 million missing women in India and 50 million missing in China. Now, some of the discrimination that the children undergo, the girls undergo, is very intense. For example, immunization, which is very basic stuff that we want to give the children. So for girls, the initiation of immunization is delayed. People don't take the children and go for immunization. And at times, they start the immunization, but they don't complete all the immunizations that should be done for the girls. And then within the family, if a boy is born, they take the boy quickly for immunization. One of the places that I worked, twins were born, one boy and one girl. And can you imagine, they brought the boy but not the girl for that immunization. I was so annoyed with them, I turned them, I said, you please go. Unless you bring the other child, I will not immunize this one. So they came next week with both children. So you when you're really in that situation, you really get wild with them. I'm human. Another thing is about nutrition. The gender discrimination in nutrition. Breastfeeding, even from breastfeeding, they breastfeed more often and for years, sometimes 3 years, if it's a male baby. And if it's a female one, on and off breastfeeding and stop. In between they give chai, that means tea, for the child. So that's it. And when the girls grow up, there the discrimination continues. I've seen in villages, and I talk to these people and the children, the boys are given milk, egg, chicken, everything, and the girls may get the chicken wings, whereas the boys may get the drumstick. There's so much discrimination within the family. And when boys fall sick, they are rushed to the hospital. But I remember seeing a girl in a village, about 3 years old, with very high temperature, severe chest infection, left in the hut all by herself. Okay? So that's the situation. Now, who does these discrimination? To a large extent, the women discriminate in this way. They don't provide proactively and take care of the girls in the family. So it's self-inflicted, like the same gender causing this to perpetuate. Well, because of all these problems, the children have more risk of dying due to these diseases, and they have malnutrition, especially anemia, as they grow up. When we look at literacy, which is a fundamental thing which helps broaden one's perspectives, we see that there is low enrollment of girls in schools, high dropout, and then they have poverty, bonded labor, child labor practices which prevent girls from going to school, and older girls taking care of younger siblings. And an additional factor is the dowry system. We have something called the dowry, by which cash and kind and gold and property is given by the girl's people to the groom's house. So the more the girl is educated, you have to get a more educated boy. And the more the boy is educated, you have to give more of these stuff. So then they work backwards. They prevent the girls from going to school. Now, within India itself, we have a very large difference in the literacy rate. There are areas like Kerala where it is 92%, and in central India we have tribal populations where it is 5%. And now when you look at it, India is so complex, as I said. There are 1,652 mother tongues in India. And then to make all of them read and write in 22 languages, which are called state languages, is quite a task. To produce all the materials, all the ways, motivating them to be literate. So any program which is helping literacy program, literate, especially for women, it really builds them up. Now I want to say that we in the sub-Himalayan region, we had a lot of literacy programs going on, about 700 learners per year, and it really brought up the dignity of the girls and women. And I still remember in that place there was a culture long ago where there was polyandry, and over the years this was replaced. They don't really have the polyandry, but then in practice it is so, which means that all the wives of a particular family are exchanged and slept with by all the men of that family. Do you get what I mean? Yeah. And guess who decides which daughter-in-law would sleep with which son? It was the mother-in-law's turn to allot. Can you believe that? That who would sleep with her son that night? So when literacy strengthened their dignity, I would say, the girls refused to take part in such activities and were very firm that they would only live with their own husbands they married. So we see that it brings a change in their lives. We see gender discrimination in different areas. One is in the workload, the other one is in employment, and gender gap in villages, in wages. That is a real problem because professionally we are all paid equal, but then under unskilled, semi-skilled work, the ladies are paid much less for doing the same jobs. Toilet is, you will be wondering what toilet has got to do with indignity. 1 in 3 women across the world do not have access to toilet. I'm not sure whether, suppose you have a bad tummy and you want to go to the toilet. Suppose you're in a place where there's no toilet. You know how uncomfortable it is, isn't it? And that is their predicament each day because they have to wait for the right circumstances so that they can go and ease themselves. And when they go, they have to go outside the village, and there is a lot of problem on the way. There are men, there's rape going on, there's all sorts of harassment going on the way to toilet. Okay. I remember in one of the villages that we worked, a little girl about 3 years old had to, go to the toilet. She went outside the house in the dark, and while her mother just came back into the house, a leopard took this child and went away and ate the child. So it can be, so bad. It's problem with the human beings attacking these people, men attacking these women, and then sometimes it's the animals. So in that whole place we started doing toilets, helping people to build toilets. And because there was no toilet, there was no bathroom. So girls used to just stand outside and have a bath, and they were abused in many ways. So then we promoted so that everyone who built a toilet would also build a bathroom. It's not very visible, but that's what you see there. It's a simple Indian toilet. But then that gives dignity to them, that they need not go into the field and here and there and abused by men and all that stuff. They have their privacy. Female genital mutilation is another thing, mostly practiced in Africa. It's harmful to the health and well-being of the woman. It can cause severe bleeding. When I say mutilation, a part of the genital area of the woman is chopped off by dirty hands and blade or scissors or whatever they get. And they stitch that area so that the girl will not have any desire to have sex. That's the idea. And it's very bad because they can get urinary tract infection, they can have fallopian tube can get infected, and later on childbearing can be problem. But all this is done by women. Child marriage is another problem. In India, there is one place called Rajasthan, where that's an epicenter of child marriages. There are about 40% of the global child marriage take place there in our country. It was interesting to know that the laws about child marriage is different. In other words, the legal age to be married in South Africa is 12 years, and that in Saudi Arabia it can be even 8 years. So when they are married at 10 or 12, they are legal. But then, because we don't have a uniformity of the age at which a girl could be married, these things prevail. Now, just as in any part of the world, adolescent girls and boys, as they grow up, they would not like to be very, primitive in their ways. They like to dress like anyone else, or they like to find their own partners, or they want to disagree with what their parents are arranging a marriage. For all these things, they are killed. Can you believe that? By their own family or the community for going against the will and norms of the community. So that's called honor killing. And it is practiced in a number of countries. And it's said that about 20,000 women are honor killed each year. And in Pakistan, it's said to be 3 per day. Even if it is a rape, they are killed. The woman is killed, not the man. I remember a girl who was in love with a boy, and they wanted to elope because it's not allowed to get married. And when the family people came chasing after this, literally chasing them, they were in the block where I was working, and that girl, in fear because the brothers were coming trying to catch her, jumped off a window from the 8th floor, fell down and died. They feel it's better to kill oneself than to be killed by the brother. So this still exists. Trafficking, I'm sure you know all about trafficking and how women are trafficked for sexual exploitation, pornography, or to work in circus, many things like that. There's something called bride kidnapping, also known as marriage by abduction, marriage by capture. This is when a man who is interested in a particular girl just goes there with his friends or relatives and captures this girl and takes her by force. And then she is raped until she subjects herself to be the wife of that man. So that's one thing happening. In Haryana, this again is in India, this is a different type, in which women are purchased from far-off regions in the garb of marriage. And they're cut off from their parents, and they have to eat vegetarian food, and then they have no rights in the family. They are sexually exploited by all the males in that family and by the husband's employer. He has a fair share in that. So ultimately, they have to work in the fields and respond to the sexual needs of all these men. Well, we move on to domestic violence. It's interesting to know that they are classified less severe. Punching is less severe, it seems. How do you like it? Severe domestic violence. I was telling the other day that in the hospital, a lady came to the hospital with a dagger, moving like this on her back. It was a fight between her husband and her, and the dagger was still there. She was conscious. She was talking to us. And because it was touching the aorta, each time the heart was beating, this was moving this way and that way. And it frightened all of us doctors there because, the moment you pull this out, she would collapse because the lungs and everything would be. Of course, it took about a dozen doctors, many hours, and they revived her. So that is domestic violence. It is interesting to know that in the developed countries, it is very clear that women would say domestic violence is not acceptable. But there are many countries which says there are instances in which a man can be violent and beat the wife. The women themselves accept it, that it is true that there are situations in which women can be beaten up. So that shows how they feel, the worth they have about themselves. Dowry harassment. Dowry is what you pay in cash, as I told you, to the bridegroom's place. And the bridegroom and the family is never ever satisfied with what is given or agreed upon. They keep on asking the girl and humiliate the bride over and over again to go and bring more and bring more. And when they don't do that, because the girl knows that in the family there's nothing much there. Already they've been into debt conducting this grand wedding. So many times she just puts kerosene and sets herself to flame. At other times it's the husband and the relatives who do this to her. They just kill her. And it is very sad to see that though there are many cases reported, only a few get convicted. Now we move on to maternal malnutrition. In India and in some other places, there is a feeling that if you feed the mother quite well, the baby would become very big and then the delivery would be very difficult. So they don't give proper food to the mother. Actually the mother needs more nutrition, but then it's devoid of it. So a common thing that you find is anemia. And that is one reason why, the women die in delivery, because if there is a little bit of excess bleeding, already it is in a low condition, and then a little more just tilts and the woman dies. So this anemia is one thing. The other one is, vitamins are not given. So the child, is born with spinal birth defects, spina bifida and things like that. Or become cretin because the iodine content is not okay. Malnourished, unable to really take care of the child. So there is a higher mortality, morbidity of the mother, and there is health risk for the little baby. There can be growth retardation, stillbirth, premature delivery, all sorts of things, or neonatal death. And long term also they have problems. It's pitiable, when you see women like this who have no control over their reproductive lives. How many children to have. It's not that the husband and wife decide. It's their in-laws, the others in the family, they say, you need to have 2 boys. Having just 1 boy is like having 1 eye. You need to have 2 boys, things like that. And they keep on pestering and forcing the woman to give birth to boys. And if the child is a female one, abort. If the child will be born in an inauspicious month, abort. Or if that priest or somebody says this child is going to be a bad omen for the father or grandfather or whoever it may be, abort. So there's various ways in which they are forced to abort, and the woman has no control. We also have compulsory sterilization. I'm sure you're aware of it, that government programs and policies at times force people to get surgical sterilization done. It has been in many countries, and sometimes they are bribed. Sometimes the government officials are given targets. Per month you have to bring so many. So they are just forcing people to get the tubectomy done. So even without the consent, this is done. And sometimes even the, what shall I say, culture is that. I remember working in a place where we had a tubectomy camp, and a man brought a woman for tubectomy, tubal ligation. And then I asked him to sign, the mother has to put the sign here, and the wife and the husband. And they said he's not the husband. Then I said, without the husband's signature, how can I do tubectomy for this girl, for this woman? They said in this culture, the husband's elder brother has all rights over all the women in that family. So what he decides is final. And then I asked, where is this lady's actual husband? They said, oh, he's in the next town. He was not aware that this tubectomy is going to be held. Well, now Paige was talking about all these, so I would skip that. When we come into research bias, it is interesting to know that researchers usually consider human beings, men and women, equal. But in clinical trials and the way that certain drugs work, it may not be so. And majority of the lab animals are male, and some even exclude the females. They're saying that their data may get altered because of the hormonal things and how things function if we have females there. And many times you don't have a stratified analysis of to learn about how the drug undergoes the pharmacokinetics, effectiveness, adverse effects, dose response, blood concentration, all these which vary in different cycles of women. So it is not taken into account. Now, we all know that cardiovascular research is largely done on men. Men, as you know, suffer that in a lower age group. Women have the same problems at a higher age group, usually after menopause. But then adequate research is not done among them. But it is just practiced as though everybody is the same. Now when we go on to healthcare provision also, I was really surprised to see that. Total joint arthroplasty, men are given the privilege of having that. Peripheral arterial disease, again, men are preferred. Management of stroke in Europe and even North America, women with stroke were less likely than men to receive appropriate diagnostic imaging, antithrombotic therapy, and revascularization. So somehow we are all like that we automatically give more preference to men and things like that, even in clinical practice and in organ donation and so on and so forth. Now we go on to abuse of women with disabilities. It is very sad to see that when people, especially women, have disabilities of various intensity, could be physical or mental or whatever it is, that they take different forms. One is neglect, denial of food, lack of inappropriate personal or medical care, physical abuse, rough or inappropriate handling, overuse of restraint, so many things. Confinement into the house. I remember in the villages that we did some surveys, these children and girls with disabilities were not accounted for. So when you ask how many children you have, they would say the number of boys and then girls, but not number the disabled children. So they don't have a number even. They don't have a face, they don't have a number. Then psychological abuse, verbal abuse, intimidation, social isolation, emotional deprivation, all sorts of things. Sexual abuse, very common among women with disabilities. And, all sorts of sexual abuse. Financial exploitation, denial of finance, or even if it all belong to the woman, it will be all managed by the man, and she has no say in anything. So, who do you think are the perpetrators? Usually, it is the male members of the same family or very closely known male members. And only a very small, minuscule percentage of abusers are strangers. And when such a girl becomes pregnant because she can't defend herself or do anything, recently this happened in one of our hospitals. This hospital is on a hill actually, and the gynecologist examined her and found that she was pregnant. She was unmarried. She had mental capacity limitations. When her brother and sister came to know of it, who were standing outside that hall, they were informing her parents. Now, the parents said, don't bring her home, finish her off. And after a while, when the doctor was busy doing something else, she looked out of the window and saw this brother and sister pushing her off the edge of that mountain, trying to kill her. And the doctor came running down to stop that. But then who knows what happens to her when she goes home. She's not wanted in the house, and that will be a shame. So this is a type of honor killing. Now, women also have a bad time when it comes to disasters, because in disasters, different types of disasters, women are not really well prepared. The casualties are more, and the violence against them is much more after any disaster. There's also a phenomenon of flight of men after disasters. The women are struggling with their children and all the things in the house, whereas the men, when a disaster, a cyclone or whatever comes, they just run away. They just go away from the scene, leaving behind the women and children. That again puts a lot of pressure on the woman. And by mistake, if that man dies, all the property is confiscated because it no longer belongs to her, unless she has a boy in the family. So women really have it very rough. And needless to say that, sexual abuse in disasters is very prominent. What happens in times of war? That's another time where women are really in a bad shape. They lose all their dignity. Historically, it was socially accepted that rape was part of war. It's said to be an ancient and customary evil. And in World War II, Chinese and Korean people had comfort women. That is, women were captured and given to the soldiers for their comfort. And there have been mass rapes in Bosnia and other places, and forced virginity checks. And for soldiers, rape was considered as one of the spoils of war. So all these ways have been a problem. Now, currently rape is very much, has got its attention in different ways. And it is, of course, very dehumanizing. And of course, the girl who goes through the rape is, stripped of any dignity that she has. And some of you would have read about the rape, gang rape, which took place in India on the 16th of December 2012. And it is horrific to see how, in a moving bus, 5 men raped a girl, beat up her boyfriend, and threw them out of the bus after introducing a long metal rod through the vagina and, spoiling all the internal organs. Of course, she died. So it's becoming more and more problematic. And as I think these things will increase with, this sex ratio being like this, and there are missing women. And as if it is not sufficient that this girl has gone through this rape, the medical examination for sexual assault has its own problems. A blanket consent is obtained for medical examination. Then depending on the availability of the doctor, male or female, he examines this lady whether really rape has taken place. And they rely on this finger test, whether 2 fingers can be in, and then they are thinking whether she was habituated to sex or not, which is totally irrelevant. And then they look for all sorts of injuries. Then they say if this lady was really, a good lady, she would have refused. She would have been bold. She would have been, everything. We all know that men are much more physically strong. And in a state of this happening, I think she would be shocked and she would not be able to, defend herself. So all these things are evidence that she's treated in a very bad way. And even in a court of law, they start cross-examining. Was he using a T-shirt? Was he using a blue shirt? Or what was he doing? Or did he have a cap or not? For heaven's sake, how can this lady remember all that? So you end up traumatizing that lady much more for going and reporting about that. Finally, we look at widowhood in India. It's estimated that there are about 40 million widows, and widow is, as it's referred to as it, not she. And they are called that you're husband eater. That means you have consumed the husband and you're still alive, and things like that. There's a restriction of what food she should take, and they are made to look ugly. What I mean is they shave off the head. For girls the hair is a little beautiful, and they just shave off that. You should not put any makeup. You should not look fine. You should cover your head and put white dress and be in a state of mourning. She should not attend any wedding or anything that is a cause of celebration. She has to be, not seen. She should be in hiding. So that is the situation. And they are thought to be inauspicious, so they should not come out. So widows have it in a very tough time. I would like to say about one widow in India. She is about a young widow, 28-year-old, who lost her husband, and a very, very old lady who was bent over her stick came to me when we were having a family planning sterilization camp. And I was so upset why this widow wanted a she wanted a copper T insertion. So I said, you're a widow. Then why on earth do you want this procedure? And I was, I had to translate it back and forth into their local language and Hindi and everything. Ultimately, I came to know that this lady who's a widow is not welcome in her mother's house. And if she has to continue to stay in her husband's house, there are many other brothers in the husband's family who want to have sex with her. And if she refuses, they say, get out of the house. And if she agrees to it and becomes pregnant, then they say, you have gone elsewhere and got pregnant. Now get out. So the only way was to put a copper T so that this illiterate woman who has no way of sustaining herself can be alive. So where is her dignity? Anyway, so we come perhaps to the last slide. Widowhood in Africa is no better. They are abandoned by the relatives, and there's indifference by friends and society. Here again, they are said to be accused of being responsible for the death of the husband, and they are expected to be in mourning, and they do not have any right to inherit land or property. And they're not even allowed to bathe as and when they want. So if they have to retain their property, then they have to marry the brother's brother or her nephew. So sexual abuse is again too much there. And to top it all, you have some dehumanizing rituals, shaving of head and taking an oath of innocence involves drinking from the bath water of the corpse and sleeping alone with the corpse to say that they are innocent. Now, as we hear about all these things, it looks gloomy, isn't it? But there is hope. Why? Because you and I are here. And we can bring about hope and dignity to the people in whatever we do. So I want to encourage you to think about it, not just, go away. Whatever little you do, if you bring dignity to one girl, down the line, all the people will have a better way of life. If you are building toilets, if you are doing research, helping these ladies to come up in some way or other, it's going to change the world. The change is happening in some of the countries like this. The changes have happened rapidly. Others are lagging behind. And maybe it's our turn to help them. It's almost like, they're all in the well, unable to come out. Somebody has to put a rope or something and bring them out. Not put everything from top, not, shower muffins from here. No, bring them out. I think together we can do it. Thank you.